Good morning. Order, order, as they say. First of all, can I thank our witnesses? Would you, for the record, would you just like to introduce yourselves? Mr. Walker. Sorry, can I say, when you're speaking, can you press the button on the microphone, and when you finish speaking, if you could press it again so it goes off, so we don't talk over each other.
Good morning, my name's Andrew Walker. I'm Managing Partner for Johnson Michael in Aberdeen. I'm also involved in corporate finance, which is mergers and acquisitions for companies. Johnson Michael are the largest independent firm of accountants in Scotland. We've got 11 offices across Scotland. We're a fair cross-representation of Scottish economy. The Aberdeen office is focused on oil and gas services and food and production, so we've seen quite a few things that are impacted from things.
Yes, good morning. My name's Deirdre Michie. I'm the CEO of Oil and Gas UK. We are the trade association representing the offshore oil and gas industry. We have 430 members from Shetland down to Southampton and everywhere in between, and our role is to represent this great industry. So thank you very much. It's very good to see you here today, and you are very welcome.
This university and the University of Edinburgh. I'm director of the Centre on Constitutional Change, which is based in Edinburgh, and we've been doing a lot of work on the Brexit referendum and the follow-through from that.
Good morning, my name's Suzanne Burr. I'm a business manager for Thorpe Malloy Recruitment. Thorpe Malloy are a local Aberdeen agency, specialist recruitment agency, and we're working with companies across all different sectors.
Well, thank you all very much indeed for coming to give evidence. Now, we've got a lot of ground to cover in a relatively short time, so I know my colleagues will keep their questions succinct, and if you could keep your answers reasonably succinct, then we've got the best chance of hearing from as many of you as possible. I wanted to kick off and ask you, Deirdre Michie, first of all, what does Brexit mean for the North Sea oil and gas industry?
Thank you very much. Can I set a bit of context, Chair, in terms of the industry? I think that's important to do so. We are actually an industrial success story for the UK. We've contributed billions of pounds in tax revenues over the years. We continue to support 330,000 jobs across the whole of the UK, and obviously we make a significant contribution to the UK in terms of its security of energy supply, which is a very important element that we need to make sure we continue to be thoughtful about. So as an industry, we are going through a downturn that is quite significant. We're 2 years into that downturn, and we've seen significant job losses. The big issue that's facing us at the moment is the drop-off in investment. So we've seen a significant drop-off in investment, which has an impact in terms of the activity levels, and that impacts on the supply chain. So as an industry, we are turning ourselves around in terms of we are much more competitive, our costs are under control, and we are a much more efficient business in which we want to continue to attract investment. So our issues in a Brexit context are that government needs to ensure it doesn't get distracted by Brexit, and that the actions it takes today are as important as the actions it will take in a Brexit context going forward. So we need to ensure that everything we do ensures that industry is competitive going forward, and that we are seen as an attractive industry that people want to invest in going forward. So we have a number of areas. That's the first one. In terms of we're a global industry, so we do need to see continued movement of goods and services and people, and obviously limiting any tariff or non-tariff barriers is very important in that regard, because again, as an industry being under pressure, any additional burdens will be of significance to us. In terms of a strong voice in Europe, at the moment there's legislation going through. We need to ensure that the UK continues to be leading in the negotiations that are happening at Europe on existing legislation, and obviously be thoughtful about how it will continue to influence legislation once we're out of Europe. That's very important. The fourth point is energy trading in Europe. We obviously trade gas across in terms of the pipelines into Europe. This is a significant security of energy supply. So again, making sure that we have access, we have a level playing field in terms of tariffs and commercial codes. And then finally, if I just conclude, in terms of regulation, There is a lot of regulation. As industry, we look for continuity and we look for predictability. Some of the legislation that we've asked our members about, they are content with in relation to safety and the environment, because we had significant input into that development of that legislation as the UK. We'll continue to ask our members, but from a safety and environment point of view, we're actually quite content with that regulation as it stands.
You talked about energy trading. What is your view about the prospect of leaving the internal energy market?
So I think we want to stay part of the internal energy market, because, you know, if you think about the actual infrastructure, you know, we are linked. We're a net importer of gas, but obviously we export, you know, in terms of when the market, you know, in the summer when we have extra capacity. So all our gas is being traded through into Europe, into Belgium and into the Netherlands. So obviously from a gas point of view, it is very important that, you know, we are clear about how we're going to manage that going forward.
And a question to you, but also to others, the importance of, you mentioned staff, intra-company transfers in particular, how important is being able to continue to do that to the oil and gas sector?
Very important. So we're a global industry, and we thrive on the diversity of the people, of the skills. We've asked our members, and this is something we're looking to get more information on, but, you know, some examples we're given is in terms of some of the specialised disciplines, actually sourcing from Europe has been very important in terms of engineering and some of the subsea disciplines that we look to source for this industry. So it is important.
And other members of the panel on flow of staff, continuing to be able to get the best talent? Mr. Walker, Ms. Burr?
Yeah, we are seeing the same thing, that there's a desire to move staff about. The oil and gas is an international business anyway. We've built up a credibility and a knowledge base in the northeast, particularly in the subsea sector, that is world leading. And that's been done because there has been involvement not just from the northeast corner, it is involving the best people that they can. Certainly, if you look at the amount of influence that, say, for people from France are having in the subsea sector, with Total coming over, Technip, etc., then it is a major part for it. And it is a specialist area, and therefore you do need to have the best people for that.
Ms. Bow?
I would agree with both those comments as well. From what our clients have said to us, it's important that they're able to move their staff freely, and also access talent from wherever location that might be. But yes, moving employees to different offices from different countries is important to them.
And Professor Keating, from the university's point of view?
Well, I'm here primarily to talk about the constitutional question.
No, indeed.
But on the universities thing, freedom of movement is really important to universities. It's even more important than the research funding, which could be replaced, but freedom of movement could not. For example, in my centre, we've got 7 postdoctoral fellows, and only 3 of them are British.
Peter Grant.
Thanks very much, Chair, and good morning, everybody. Can I start with a couple of questions to you, Professor Keating? You've written quite a bit recently about the way that the devolved nations could be involved in either preparation for the negotiations and negotiations themselves. What would you see as the best way that the UK government could involve Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland in that process?
Well, we're all waiting to see what the UK government's position is, and the Scottish government certainly has said that it would want to stay in the single market and the customs union. If that is not on the agenda, then it's a little bit difficult to see what the Scottish government's input might be. If I just go through the options that are facing Scotland, one is, let's just go along with Brexit. That is very difficult because there was a 62% majority here to remain, which is quite a significant mandate. And the second is, let's participate in the process and get as much as we can out of it, which would mean a so-called soft Brexit, which I would define as being in the single market and the customs union. The third is to go for a differentiated settlement. The Scottish government will bring proposals forward tomorrow, and we'll try and get that accepted. It seems to be something to do with remaining getting access to the single market to do with freedom of movement and possibly involvement in European matters. That's going to be quite difficult, but that is something upon which the devolves would want to negotiate. And the third option is to say, well, after Brexit, automatically some powers will come back to the devolves because at present they're Europeanised. Let's work on those. That raises all kinds of implications. Just take agriculture and fisheries. The powers would come back to Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland, but the money wouldn't necessarily come back. So there's a question of what would happen to the money there, what kind of mechanisms would be put in place to get some kind of UK single market in agriculture and fisheries if we didn't have the European single market. And finally, of course, in the case of Scotland, there's the independence option, which is still on the table. Now, the arrangements that are being put in place for representing the devolved administrations, to some extent, they echo the present mechanisms for dealing with European matters, but I think they're somewhat weaker, because normally when devolved matters are under discussion in the Council of Ministers, the devolved governments are invited to the preparatory meetings, they can sometimes attend, they can get the papers circulated. This new Joint Ministerial Committee European negotiations, the devolves are invited there, but it doesn't seem to me that they have all the infrastructure to back that up, the circulation of papers, the presence in the Council of Ministers. So they're not involved in the negotiations in the way they normally would be, and I think that's potentially quite problematic because, as I said, there are a number of distinct issues. I've mentioned the Scottish ones, but there are distinct issues relating to Wales and Northern Ireland as well.
Thank you very much. Can I come back to the issue, the possible option that you raised in your answer, which was trying to find a differentiated settlement either for the individual nations or in some cases for the individual regions within the United Kingdom. And you've previously written that from what you've heard from government ministers, you don't think there's much scope for that to happen. Can you tell us where are the significant legal, constitution or technical barriers to creating a system where different parts of the UK had a slightly different relationship with the European Union?
Well, there are constitutional issues and legal issues, there are economic issues and there are political issues. And in many ways, it's the political issues that are the most important, because the EU has made it clear that the single market is a single thing, that you can't separate off freedom of movement from the other things. Now, legally, technically, you could do it, but they're not willing to do it because everybody else would want it done. Everybody else would want a differentiated settlement just to suit their own needs. If we'll know tomorrow, and I'll be blogging about this tomorrow, but the suggestion is that Scotland could stay in the single market if the rest of the UK came out. I find that extremely difficult to imagine, because if you've got the UK outside the single market, Scotland inside the single market fully, say on Norwegian lines, you'd have a single market border between England and Scotland. And that would cause problems for trade within the United Kingdom. Now, maybe it's not being in the single market. Maybe it's differentiating with regard to other things. For example, with freedom of movement, which is another priority of the Scottish Government, I think there could be a certain amount of flexibility there. Other countries have differentiated migration regimes in different parts of the country. That could be dealt with. I could see Scotland could continue to participate in some European programmes on the basis of paying for them. The research programme, for example, if the UK was outside that, Scotland could get back into it. But that core issue about the single market, I think that's highly problematic. And if Scotland were to stay in the single market, it would not only require some kind of barriers between Scotland and the rest of the UK, it would also require the devolution of all single market powers to the Scottish Parliament so that we could transpose the European directives. Now, again, technically that could be done. It looks to me very close to independence, but it could be done. But I just don't see what the point of that would be. I can see the point in being independent. I can see the point in staying in the United Kingdom. But that particular settlement seems to me the most complicated of all. And I just can't see either the UK government or the European Union going for that. But we'd have to see what the proposals are tomorrow, the detailed proposals, because if we get down to the detailed proposals, then we can say, well, some of this is realistic and some of it maybe it's not.
Thank you very much for that, Professor Keating. Deirdre, can I come on to you now? We've heard from a number of witnesses, and you mentioned it yourself in your previous answer, about the need for certainty and predictability in relation to whether it's regulation or anywhere else. Has the UK government done enough so far to give the certainty and assurances that the oil and gas industry in particular is looking for? And if not, what more should they be providing just now?
So in terms of government support, both government supports for industry, we've seen support in terms of the fiscal regime. We do now have one of the most competitive fiscal regimes globally, so that has been very helpful. We've had intervention by the government in terms of support for the City Deal and the support for the Oil and Gas Technology Centre, and we've also had the Scottish Government with the Scottish Enterprise Jobs Energy Task Force. So I think both governments recognise that this is a very important industry and have looked to support us as we've been going through this downturn, and at the same time industry has been looking to improve its competitiveness. So I think it's about ensuring that as we go forward, people continue to keep our industry on their agenda, keep supporting us as we ensure that we are competitive, and keep promoting us as an industry that is a good place to invest in.
Thank you. If we look ahead to after Brexit's completely happened, sorry, looking ahead to after exit has completely happened, what discussions have you had with UK government departments about how the future trading arrangements for the oil and gas industry might look between ourselves and the European Union? And related to that, if it was entirely up to you, if you could create a setup that was optimal for your organisation and for the businesses and the employees in your industry, what would that look like?
So in terms of, we've certainly been invited to, to roundtables to give as much information and to share where we see the risks and where we see the opportunities. So we've had that opportunity. I think, as I said, in terms of what would we ideally like, well, the energy trading one is obviously very important, that we would want to make sure that we can continue to trade with Europe, and also, as I said, in terms of the free movement of people and investment and goods and services, the less barriers that there are associated with that at a time when industry is under a lot of pressure is obviously key for us. And then the other piece about the negotiating of current legislation that's going through the EU is also very important, that the UK has a strong voice now and influences later on. Okay.
Can I ask, follow up one of your earlier answers, Deirdre? You said that the main problem at the moment is there isn't any investment happening. Presumably the low oil price is the main reason for that. But were you suggesting that there is a Brexit factor as well? Do you think the Brexit decision is impeding investment, and if so, why?
So our issues were pre-Brexit, and our issues, the lack of investment has been part of the global downturn, which has been going on for 2 years. The Brexit adds an additional risk to our industry because it is an additional element of uncertainty. So that's why anything that governments do now in terms of being predictable and supporting the industry helps the industry think that actually as it goes forward to in a Brexit context, it understands what industry needs, and therefore that will influence the Brexit thinking. So no, the lack of investment is a pre-Brexit issue.
Now the oil price is going up a little bit. Are we starting to see the prospects of new investment, or is there still not really any sign?
So we think that 2016, the challenges that we've seen in 2016 will continue into 2017. Our big issue is the lack of fresh investment. So we've moved from, last year we had 5 projects, £4.3 billion associated with that. This year it's down to 1 project and 100 million. So it's that lack of fresh investment that feeds through, or that doesn't feed through, because then you have a lack of activity, a lack of drilling, and then the consequences for the industry in terms of production going forward could be quite significant.
You said that a bit of certainty about the future would help. The Prime Minister has said that before triggering Article 50, the government will publish its plan for Brexit. What information do you think should be in that? What information would you like to have to support the industry?
So I think we need to be
So can you give us some examples of the kind of questions, specific questions that you would like answered in that plan?
in terms of how we go forward. And I suppose it'll be understanding which regulations.
Well, presumably questions like the one that we were talking about earlier, whether we'll stay in the energy market, those kind of things, I suppose.
Yes, thank you for that. So indeed, so things like are we in there? Are we, how much of what kind of tariff barriers will be imposed, whether they're monetary ones or whether they are like customs unions ones, etc., etc. So being clear about the specifics will. The more specific people can be, the more helpful that will be in terms of our planning.
Can I ask the other members of the panel whether you've got any comments about things that you think ought to be in this plan when it's published ahead of triggering Article 50 by the end of March?
Yeah, if I can return to my earlier comments about Scotland and link it to that, I think we really do need to know about the customs union and about the relationship to the single market. There's a great deal of confusion about access to the single market, members of the single market and so on. That needs to be clarified. And when I was talking about Scotland, I was hesitant about what the options are because the more access the UK has to the single market, then the easier it would be for Scotland to remain within both markets. But if we are heading for a position where we're outside the single market and outside the customs union, then it becomes more difficult for Scotland to have this slightly differentiated relationship. And I know that business and many people are looking for clarity on that. We know that the UK is not going to give away its detailed bargaining position, the UK government, but at least we should have some idea of where we're heading. And it's not just the devolves, but also industry sectors are looking for that. What are the priorities that are being set within these negotiations, and then they can provide an input into that.
Anyone else? Andrew, yeah.
Yeah, I think back to the point we had before, the projects that are being commissioned are on a worldwide basis. So if you're looking at things, you're going to look at the risk around it. There's an added level of risk just now because of the uncertainties being caused. That therefore turned the returns you need up, competing against other projects. That's bound to have a detrimental impact. And then back to this point of, even if you do sanction a new project, these projects are not, it is a long-term project. And therefore, again, it's back to what the regime amongst investing and trying to make a return from our shareholders. Now, the industry has had a challenge because they weren't getting the returns on the investments they were making before. It's probably under more scrutiny. And of course, the last bit is, even if you do sanction a project, the next question is, well, who do I need to actually deliver it? What equipment do I need? What people do I need? Next question is, actually, do I have an issue with duties or actually not being able to get the people into? So again, it's just back to this level of uncertainty, and this is not going to be unusual for oil and gas. It's actually for all industries. We keep talking about the fact that there's been a lack of investment from British industry, and I would say, well, since 2007, if you look at the amount of uncertainty that's been caused and things that we didn't foresee, I can understand why you don't make an investment, because an investment by definition, it's very unusual for it to make a very quick return. But if you're making an investment compared to other countries and you've got so much change, then it is going to be putting people off. I'm better off sitting my hands, because if I invest it and make the wrong investment, what happens then? And if I go back to particularly the oil and gas service community, they've gone through, Deirdre mentioned about the lack of new projects, etc. We've got a skills base here that have been developed over the years. But if there's not any more projects, and a lot of that skill base, it's already being lost to a certain extent because there's just not been the work. We're going to lose that capability again. or certainly we're going to be in a much weaker position than we were before, because we did have a leading position in subsea in particular. I mean, subsea sector, because of the time lag of when a project's commissioned to when it actually comes to fruition, the subsea sector is going to be badly hit again next year because of this lack of decisions made, and that's one of the key exporting capabilities that we actually have in this corner of the world. So there's a lot of things that people need to think about and try and encourage, and I'm not sure what else the government can do other than there's this big question mark that nobody can answer just now.
Well, just one more question. The Prime Minister has also said she doesn't want there to be a cliff edge at the end of the negotiations. And I wonder, in the areas that you're all working in, are you aware of particular dangers of a cliff edge variety? And if so, what do you think the government should be doing about it? Do you think there should be some sort of transitional arrangement to avoid the dangers of a cliff edge?
Can I take that? So, yes, in terms of a cliff edge, businesses don't like cliff edges. They like predictability, as I said. They like business continuity. So anything that can enable us to have business continuity, whether it's transitional arrangements, will be appreciated and would be needed.
Yeah, I would say I think there's got to be a transitional arrangement, because I just don't think this can be done within the 15 months they're talking about, that Barnier talked about, which is going to be the real time. And the concern is whether those traditional transitional arrangements will remain permanent. It could create continuing uncertainty. But if you look at the task, and day by day it becomes apparent how complicated this is going to be, particularly if we're talking about dealing with individual sectors and individual parts of the country, there's got to be some kind of transitional plan.
Sorry.
Yes, Mr. Walker.
Just add one final thing. I mean, the uncertainty and the period of uncertainty, one other aspect that we'll have in the North Sea is you've got people with fields and they're not sure what to do with it. The fields are already past their expected working life. The question is, do you go and invest money to prolong the life, or do you hold off, and then by the time you actually have clarity to make a decision, it's maybe too late to either. The amount of money you need to invest in infrastructure is too much to get a return. And I think that's one of the big issues, particularly given the position that the North Sea industry is in relative to its production base.
Thank you. Sammy Wilson.
Yes. But I think that's now become inevitable. You're absolutely right. But then if we can't get this all done within that very short period of time, there's got to be some kind of transitional arrangement. And that's why I think it's important for the UK government to declare as soon as possible what it's looking for, what the basic outline of its plan would be, and therefore we know where we're likely to end up in the best scenario. But we don't even have that at the moment.
And if I could add, I think these things can be done in parallel, and I don't think that's an unreasonable expectation that you could be working towards something, but you can also be working towards putting transitional arrangements in place. And again, it's back to the predictability and the understanding of where we're heading will be helpful.
Sorry, the one other comment I would have is, and this is a perverse statement to make, but because there's so much uncertainty, it's actually at the point where a lot of people are saying, well, nobody knows what they're doing, so actually we need to do something. So they are making some investments. If there is a time window, say it's a 2-year period, all you'll have is a lot of people do nothing for 2 years. And that's actually the worst thing that can happen when everything stops. We've seen that back in 2007, 2008, when with the financial crisis, people just stopped doing anything, and that had a huge impact on a lot of industries.
I just want to ask some questions about EU funding. To what extent has EU funding, either special measures, structural funds or whatever, contributed to the prosperity of the economy in the North East?
So from an oil and gas point of view, we don't get funding from the EU. We have access through some funding arrangements in terms of some science projects, if there's an energy theme, but specifically from an oil and gas point of view, we don't. I think I would defer to my colleagues, particularly in the...
Yes, indeed. There's been very little structural fund money or regional development money coming to this part of the country because it's a very prosperous area, but there's a lot of agricultural funding coming here, and the loss of that could be quite serious. We don't know what is going to happen to that. Agricultural policy will automatically be devolved if nothing else happens because it's not reserved, but we don't know what would happen to the money, and a concern for the farmers would be, would that money continue if it comes down to the Scottish Government? How would they stand up in competition with other fields who would be looking for funding, because at the moment they're protected, and that would be a big concern, I think, for the farmers in this part of the country. And then I would add, of course, the universities as well. The university sector gets quite a lot of research money through European funding.
Agriculture and universities. The government has given assurance that until 2020, the agricultural subsidies will remain as they are, and any spending which is committed before we leave will be seen through by the existing government. Beyond that, are there any particular arrangements which the panel would see the government should be putting in place for those the two sectors that you've mentioned, agriculture and universities?
Well, as far as universities are concerned, the government could replace that. It could simply give that money to the research councils. And I wouldn't be too worried about that because I think that could be handled. I think the bigger difficulty with universities is all the networks that go around that, the collaborations that we have with other European partners. Even if we bring our own money, we don't have that common programs, and the mobility of researchers, which is really important. And European universities have done extremely well out of Europe. They've been involved in these international sectors. As far as the farmers are concerned, I think it's a political matter. Now, if the money comes back to London, it could be kept in London and we could repatriate agricultural policy back to London. I think that would be politically very difficult to do. It could come back to Scotland and Northern Ireland and Wales, in which case would it be part of the block grant? Would it be earmarked for agricultural funding? We don't know. If it is devolved, would the Scottish Government or the Northern Ireland Executive or the Welsh Government then continue to give the same priority to farmers? We don't know. I would suspect that it would be pretty difficult for farmers to get the degree of spending that they've so far got, because they've got it through European funding, and we know there's a powerful European agricultural lobby. I suspect that the UK or Scottish agricultural lobbies might be rather weaker, and they certainly would have to organise themselves to make a convincing claim to that funding in competition with health and education and all the other priorities that the UK or the devolved governments might have.
Professor Keating, you've said that the collaboration is important, and we've heard this from other witnesses as well, that universities, a lot of projects, not just the personnel, but the funding depends upon cooperation with other universities across Europe. And indeed, we've heard earlier on this morning that cooperation with universities outside Europe could become increasingly important in the future. How would you see then the funding arrangements across international boundaries being facilitated by the government post-Brexit?
Well, it would be possible post-Brexit for the UK to remain within the European research area. That would have to be negotiated. But there are other countries, not just Norway, which is, of course, in the European Economic Area, but Turkey, Israel, that are also part of that. So you can join that. And unless that were traded away in some compromise, I would expect them to do that. So it's not actually the money that I would be particularly concerned about, because we can look after ourselves and make sure the money comes. But we no longer have a say in the policies that are made, the priorities. So far we have, and we've done pretty well out of it. And there's also the collaboration that goes along with it, the networks that go with it, because we've got common sources of funding. Now, you're absolutely right to say it's not just European money, there's international collaboration as well. I don't see that Brexit would make any difference to that. It would either become more or less easy to do that. But the universities are concerned that they would lose one aspect of that set of international relationships. That's the concern. And then, as I keep on mentioning, the freedom of movement is really important, because we've got a lot of researchers. We have the pick of European researchers here. The British system is actually pretty open to international scholars coming in, unlike some other systems in Europe. So we've been able to get the really good scholars coming here for part of their career, or even to stay here. Graduate students doing their PhDs here, staying on. The Americans are really brilliant at that too. They recruit the best people around the world. So it would be important to maintain that, and not just from Europe, but for the rest of the world as well.
In the universities that you referred to in the United Kingdom, that we would be without influence anyway, whether we're in the EU or not?
I'm sure that's right. I'm not saying it would be in all respects a catastrophe. But what is important is the ability for scientific researchers to come here, to study here, to continue after their studies, and to spend part of their time or even their whole career here. Now, in the United States, they've got a visa regime which encourages people to do that. So whatever visa regime we had after Brexit, it would be important to have that in. But then we've got to remember that every sector is making that case. Oh, we'll reduce migration, but not for the scientists, not for the nurses, not for the fruit pickers and so on. If the migration numbers are coming down, then where is that really going to fall? So universities would be concerned about that whatever regime there is, it does enable us to recruit the best scientific researchers to come to this country.
Finally, the unique aspect or the features of agriculture in Scotland is bigger in Scotland than it would be, say, in England as part of the economy, as is true in Northern Ireland. There are specific issues with agriculture in Scotland that would not apply in other parts of the United Kingdom. Would you see post-Brexit the best way of financing or replacing EU finance for agriculture as having greater devolution of those powers to either the Scottish administration or other regional administrations across the United Kingdom, or is there value in having it decided centrally?
Well, there's a problem here because agricultural support would be devolved, but agricultural trade would not be devolved. And since agricultural trade is all managed in most countries, it's linked to agricultural support. So under the WTO, there's almost no regulation about agriculture. It's done through quotas and managed trade. So that would have to balance the support. And if, say, Scotland or Northern Ireland were giving a different support regime to their farmers, that could fall foul of trade rules. So those would have to be linked very closely together. Similarly, within the UK, we assume there would have to be some regime to prevent unfair competition in agricultural products. Wales was subsidising its sheep farmers, for example. That might be a problem in other parts of the United Kingdom. So something would have to be put in place. Whether that would be vertical, London setting down the rules, or horizontal by negotiation, that is another question. And then there's the question of what would happen to the funding. Brexit would give the UK and its devolved administrations the possibilities of pursuing different agricultural policies. We know there are many problems with the common agricultural policy. They might choose to do that, but that would then have implications for farmers. And the big political issue really here is whether we would continue the present generous regime of support for farmers. It's no longer support for production anymore, because that's been changed, support for farmers that we have in the past in competition with other fields. Now, that's a political decision, but it's a political decision that would have to be taken. And then, as far as you pointed out, the devolved nations are, they have more agriculture. This is less true of Scotland. It's really true of Northern Ireland and of England, but because Scotland has a lot of less favoured areas, all three devolves have a higher proportion of agricultural individual support spending than would be the case if it was simply per capita. So would the Treasury say, okay, keep what you already have, roll it into the Barnett formula, or we'll give you all the same per capita level of support? All of that would have to be sorted out, and it's going to be very conflicting. Well, obviously, there's a lot of money involved here, and that would have to be worked out. So this is the sort of concern that the devolved administrations have, quite apart from trying to stay in the single market and so on. Once you come down to individual sectors, that would all have to be worked out.
Okay, thank you. Jeremy Lefroy.
Thank you very much, and good morning. I'd like to first ask about supply chains, and perhaps to Deirdre to start with. We've taken quite a lot of evidence on obviously tariff and more importantly perhaps non-tariff barriers that might or might not exist. In your experience, could you give us some examples of where there are significant non-tariff barriers in your industry in other parts of the world which don't apply within the European Union and which are a problem for your members?
That don't apply to the European Union but are
a problem in other parts of the world, for instance, somewhere like Tanzania, where there's significant oil and gas offshore, and Mozambique. Are there significant non-tariff barriers which we don't find if we're doing business with the European Union?
So off the top of my head, I can't answer that, but we'll do some research on that and get back to you on that.
It would be very good to know, because clearly non-tariff barriers, given that the level of tariffs are not that significant, say, compared with currency devaluation risks, it would seem to me the risk of non-tariff barriers is more significant. Therefore, we need to understand what those are likely to be compared with what we might or might not face in Europe.
Yeah, no, sure, and I would agree with that. That we always assume that it's a monetary thing, but actually, no, it's not. So, for example, we've just been dealing with revised customs requirements that have been rolled out throughout Europe, and we have responded to that and we have adapted to it. And actually, we are now going to go back to our members and ask them if it is something that is now working for them. But it has been painful to bring in. But now that we have brought it in, we are working with it. But the issue would be then is the consequences for the non-tariff barriers is if something gets stuck at a particular port or whatever, the implications for production offshore, for example, could be disproportionate. So those are of concern, but we can get you some specific examples later.
Yes, maybe pick up on the point there. I'll come back to the barriers that some of the clients see, but back to the point there about we've just gone through a change in Union Custom Code and how it all operates. I have to say that it's been a real barrier for clients in the implementation, because the guidance hasn't been as clear as they would have liked. And that's evidenced by the fact that the guidance comes out and they can't actually get clarity on it, and trying to get a response from HMRC that helps them with it is causing real problems. I've got an example just now of a client who thought they had authorisation for the way they were working. They've been told that actually no, they're not going to get it. They've then asked, well, what can we do? And they just cannot get a response from anybody. Now, this could have severe implications for this business. Now, if we've just gone through this for harmonising what we're doing in the EU, the big question will be what happens when we come out. But I'll be honest with you, people aren't thinking about that just now, because actually they've been thinking about the lack of work, the change they need to make their business has been taking priority. They're thinking about just now rather than the implications of it. But I have to say, my experience of how we've gone about things has not been helpful. And HMRC's this whole idea that you can't now speak to anybody at all just makes it very difficult.
So, Mr. Walker, what you're saying is that actually there's quite a lot of, whether we're in a single market or not, there's quite a lot of barriers within our own bureaucracy, whether HMRC or elsewhere, that we need to sort out, and we would need to sort out whether we were in the EU or not.
Absolutely, and I would say in this particular case, this is a business that has been paying all its taxes, doing all the right things, creating jobs, yet they're just coming up with the computer says no. When they're trying to actually escalate it to speak to somebody about it, then they're finding real difficulty.
Thank you, that's very helpful. Could I just move on briefly to financial services, Chair? The reading I've done as a non-expert, although declared as a chartered accountant, it seems to be that actually financial services are, there's quite a lot of variation in terms of potential impact, with the highest impact potentially being around banking, investment services being in the middle, and insurance probably the least, given that most UK insurance businesses tend to operate in Europe through subsidiaries. Mr. Walker, I wonder if you would agree with that characterisation, or is it an awful lot more complex than that?
I would agree with that, but again, it's back to financial services. There's all the ancillary services that come from that in terms of IT, tax advisory, all those different bits as well. It's going to have an impact in that, and that people are quite good at reacting to change, and they are looking at how they can change their business model to react to it. But the problem just now is they just don't know what it is that they're going to have to change their model to. So I would agree with the comment.
And that's specifically around financial services. And then just one final for Professor Keating, and I'm very glad to see that you were in North Staffordshire at one part of your career in North Staffordshire Poly, now Staffs University, a great institution. Could I ask about predictability? It seems to me that looking at the various electoral events coming up in Europe, there's quite a lot of unpredictable events all around, not just in the case of the UK. Indeed, I don't know whether this is accurate or not, but given that it was the Times, one hopes that it was. The Dutch Deputy Prime Minister was quoted 2 weeks ago as saying he wanted to see a system of work permits introduced for people from East and Central Europe, which seems to be a lot more discriminatory than anything that the UK has ever looked for. I wondered if you yourself referred to very different forms of so-called free movement of labour throughout Europe, with the UK being one of the most open regimes at the moment. I wonder if you see an opportunity to adopt a regime that is possibly in use in a place like Belgium currently, in terms of free movement of labour, that might be perhaps a lot more akin to the argument about taking control than our current model is.
Yes, this is not the only country where there's concern about free movement of labour. It's an issue in the Netherlands, it's an issue in Germany. There are many things that you can do. It's a very complex issue. It's not just have freedom of movement or not, but it is an issue upon which the EU has made a matter of principle, largely for political reasons, because the existing members have said that the four freedoms go together. Logically, you could unpick them, but they are very worried that if they gave the UK what the UK might think was a more favourable regime than people who stayed in, then everybody would want that. And that's a political objection. Now, once you get down into the detail of that, I don't know what your reference to Brussels, to Belgium is, but in many European countries there are obstacles to the free movement which are not actually legal. It's just actually very difficult in practice to get into some places. We don't have that. We have a very open and deregulated labour market. I know this in the case of universities. We don't have those systems of patronage and clientelism and closed systems, and I think it's thoroughly good for universities that we don't have that. But that's, if we were to say, well, we want to introduce restrictions, I'm sure it's not those kinds of restrictions we want to introduce. And the objective of European policy is to try and get rid of those hidden obstacles as far as possible. I know it myself, because when I was working at the European University, half of our graduate students came to the UK because it was open, and a lot of them came to the Netherlands. So I think we're going to get in Europe generally a trend towards less free movement, probably. It may well be that in 10 years' time the EU will end up having a regime that British voters would have accepted had they been offered it. But the obstacle here at the moment is the principle, and the EU may look as though they're being incredibly stubborn about this, but their view is that you can't get better terms by leaving than a member state would have got by staying. That's why they're making such an important political principle out of this one.
So, may I come back?
Very quickly.
Yeah, sure. So just to clarify, and the same would probably apply to freedom in trade in services, where the UK has a much more liberal regime than many other parts of the United Kingdom.
Absolutely, and the single market in services is largely a UK creation. We were the ones who were pushing that, and we have liberalised our markets much more than most other countries.
Thanks for clarifying.
Thank you. Ms Burke, can I, on this theme, because it'd be helpful if you could tell the committee where there are skill shortages locally and how that impacts on ability to recruit, and what views you've got about the impact of what we've just been discussing. Controls on free movement, we don't yet know what form they're going to take, might have on the ability of industries and services here in Aberdeen to get the right people to do the jobs that they want done.
I think the big thing is that businesses, that they can still employ the people that they need to do the jobs. I see from our perspective, a lot of the businesses we work with are able to fill their positions locally. However, I think and it's probably the areas that we cover as an agency, but areas that I would see some shortages in where we cover are our clients that have, like, looking for yard operatives, warehouses, tending to be your sort of lower paid, low skilled jobs. We're finding a lot of EU nationals are filling these positions, and whether we would be able to fill them with more locally, it might be a struggle. And particularly, I guess, at the moment with the way that the oil and gas industry is in Aberdeen, obviously we've experienced a downturn. There have been a lot of people made redundant. There is a bigger labour market out there. However, we are still employing people in these types of positions. And once the oil and gas market does pick up at some point, it will. I think the biggest fear for a lot of our clients is that we're going to see skill shortages again. And the other key issue for them is that they don't want to have to jump through hoops to be able to employ people and fill the positions where they have gaps and they can't recruit locally for.
That is very helpful. I'm sorry that we've run out of time because we've got a second evidence session now, but can I say on behalf of the committee, we are very grateful to all of you for giving up your valuable time to give your testimony today, which has been extremely useful. Thank you very much indeed. And so, colleagues, our witnesses will go out and our next panel will come in, and then we will carry on, and the microphones may well pick up anything that anybody says in the interim, so just be aware. Can I thank our witnesses very much for giving up your time to come and give evidence to the committee this morning. For the record, it would be helpful if you could just introduce yourselves, and if you could, when you're speaking, press the button so that the microphone can pick up what you're saying. Should we start with you, Mr. Armstrong? If you could just introduce yourself.
Sure. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Bertie Armstrong, Chief Executive of the Scottish Fishermen's Federation, which is the trade association that looks after the catching sector of the fishing industry here. Thank you very much for this opportunity. It's not a question of giving up time. This is the most important thing that is happening to us today by a long chalk.
Okay, thank you.
Good morning. My name's Michael Bates. I'm the Business Development Officer for the Scottish Seafood Association, trade association for the processing sector in Scotland. We have approximately 70 members throughout Scotland, and again, similar to Bertie, this is an exceptionally important arena for us today. Thank you.
Good morning. My name is Andrew Scott. I'm the Chief Executive Officer for Scott Renewables, which is a Scottish-based technology developer in tidal energy.
Well, thank you very much indeed. Alistair Carmichael.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, gentlemen. Bertie, can I come to you first of all? I can see you can barely contain your excitement, your enthusiasm for this as an opportunity. And given the history of the common fisheries policy, you can see why the catching sector thinks that this is their big moment. Can you talk the committee through, first of all, where you see the opportunities coming for the catching sector?
Certainly. Thank you very much, Alistair, for the question. Perhaps uniquely, certainly unusually, the fishing industry of the UK is seeing a fundamental change in Brexit. For us, there is a change of governance of the waters, a radical, revolutionary change of governance in the waters from a common access space, which is most unusual, to the international law normality of a coastal state entirely responsible for the sustainable harvesting, all the rights and responsibilities that gives of the natural resource. So that's the big thing for us. And the most important part about Brexit is perhaps the following figure. Out of the UK EEZ, 58% of the fish and shellfish is removed in the beneficial hands of other EU countries. 58%, more than half of our natural resource goes elsewhere. That is unthinkable for other coastal states, and that needs to change. Taking that back is not an act of aggression, it's an act of return to normality. And that's the bit that we're most concerned about.
Sorry, this is presumably the NEFC Marine College in Scarborough report.
Exactly. Yeah. And the figures have been accessed from the European databases.
Can I ask you, though, Bertie, what, for the purposes of EU boats in UK EEZ, constitutes an EU boat? Because there are a number of boats who fish in UK waters from other EU member states who've got that entitlement essentially by purchasing it, haven't they? Do they count in that middle circle there?
No, they don't.
They don't.
What we're referring to as EU boats are Belgians, Dutch, Danes, typically French, Irish. Those flagged in those EU nations and fishing here. Anything that has a brass plate in Humberside or elsewhere, and a UK side number, but is beneficially owned by Iceland or Spain, is not counted in that.
Mr. Bates, then, looking at things from the point of view of the processing sector, the shoreside things, what's your view of the opportunities and possible threats that might come from Brexit?
Well, we see a lot of opportunities coming from Brexit, especially going back a step where the fish comes from, which is the catching sector. So if our boats are able to access more fish and land that fish, Peterhead or Fraserburgh, wherever in the UK, then that gives us processors more access to raw material. That in turn allows us to be able to continue supplying markets, to offer regular increased supplies to markets. From that, of course, you then have more job security. Hopefully, again, from that, it can lead to possible expansion of the factory, investment in the factory, and predominantly looking for more labour.
And then, your ultimate market, though, for these fish is where?
Well, basically, our ultimate market is is global. At the moment, we are trading everywhere. Our members are trading both within the UK to the traditional markets at Liverpool, Birmingham, Billingsgate, but also to food service industries, to a lot of the major multiple retailers, and we're exporting.
How much of the product that your 70 members have would be destined for the EU at present?
It would be hard to say exactly, but there's certainly, if I just take the membership that we have, knowing who exports predominantly as against selling within the UK, there's at least 60 to 70% of that product going abroad.
So the importance of tariff-free access is going to be high?
Yes, without doubt. You know, we need to continue to be able to supply that product at a competitive price. At the moment, we are competing with those foreign vessels that are accessing our fish, landing it back in their home port and selling that. So we are competing in a sense against our own product, which, if we had access to that, you know, would certainly help, because those markets can't access that fish anywhere else but the UK.
And sorry, can I just finish this point? In relation to the labour that your members are employing, predominantly EU nationals, we heard earlier on before we started an evidence session. Is that a fair comment?
Yes, that's fair. We have a lot of migrant workers employed in our sector all over Scotland, not just in the North East, where the predominant processing hub is. And yes, there are local people employed as well, but like a lot of industries in Scotland, we do have a lot of migrant workers.
So it's a mix of opportunities and some challenges, is that?
Definitely, yeah, but all positive ones.
You were wanting to come back in that.
Thank you very much. Michael's right in every respect, of course. The interesting thing about the market is that the export figures that Michael mentioned, not all of that by any means goes to the EU. For instance, the whole of the pelagic catch goes elsewhere. Japan, typically, Africa, used to go to Russia. With regard to looking forward to other markets, we were able to reset in fairly short order the slamming shut of the Russian market on the application of sanctions, and that we regard as an exemplar of the possibility of selling into this global market. A couple of figures are useful. Everyone around the table.
Sorry, Bertie, what do you mean reset there?
We lost the Russian market, and we had a lot of fish. There's 250,000 tons of pelagic fish. We didn't fail to sell any of it, and the price is held up, and that fish is now going elsewhere. I use that as an example of it is entirely possible to reset your fish output. On the matter of tariffs for fish, the WTO average is 5 to 10%. Currency, since the days of since the day after the referendum, fluctuated just shy of 20%, and always does anyway in reaction to circumstance. The point we would therefore make that let us not be frightened to death by tariffs at all. They may be consumed in the noise of currency fluctuations, and some small tariffs would not necessarily be a disaster, particularly as the other side of that coin is that you may access new markets, for instance India, that are presently shut for you because of the present circumstance. So I would look forward rather than backwards with market, and I would like to see very much a change in the rhetoric of we must be in the single market, we must be in the single market, we must be in the single market. We're not going to be in the single market. We don't need the single market. We need an adequate market in order to press our products abroad. And I'm clinging to this thought. If you have a desirable product in some volume, you will find a market for that. That's the way the world works. A prawn fisherman said to me, you know the story, Alistair? Yeah. My Spanish compadres don't buy my prawns because they think I've just read the terms and conditions of the single market, think it's very nice, I'm going to buy his prawns. They want the prawns, and if they're at a sensible price, they'll have them.
Indeed. But at that point, you are into the same selling conditions and buying conditions as you have in other markets. Now, just to come back for 1 second to the question of what you would call maybe repatriation, we will still have foreign vessels fishing in UK waters. There are historic rights that have to be taken account of. There are also advantages to the Scottish fleet fishing in other areas for which reciprocal deals will want to be cut. The EU-Norway negotiations, as they're currently constituted, are probably the most important negotiations for the North Sea and the North Sea in particular. How do you see that working in the future?
There is, thankfully, with regard to the status, the upcoming status of the UK as a coastal state, there's already a tried and tested method of that working. You've just described it. The EU-Norway talks are one circumstance of that. The EU-Faroes talks, the EU-Iceland talks, coastal states talks are all part of that. So the cooperation with other nations is the norm and is entirely possible under the new arrangements. There's again a couple more figures to bottom out this argument. It's often said, well, you need access to other people's waters, do you? Actually, we don't. 17% of our fish, 17% of our fish are caught outside our own waters. If we were to have any repatriation, it would monstrously overwhelm that. We would still wish to do that, but it's by no means essential. Really the central part of that is the engine, the repatriation of that fish. That's a terrible word. It's the return to normality of the accessing of our natural resource is the engine for all the rest of this. And the balance of advantage and disadvantage crashes onto the table on the advantage side when we take back or resume our normal position as a marketing nation. And what we want out of Brexit is that will not be negotiated away. It's not ephemeral. It's not a matter of administration. It's a natural resource of this country that will be here in 500 years if it's sustainably harvested, unlike oil, fossil fuels, gold, diamonds.
Doesn't that actually just bring us back to the nub of this politically? It's a matter of negotiation. We all know that infamous memo from the 1970s where the fisheries industry was described as being expendable. It's a question of whether government or governments in this country are prepared to give the political importance to the fishing industry. That's what will really determine whether you get what you see as being the opportunities out of this situation, isn't it?
It is absolutely right. And the argument we would like to press forward is the one of the fundamental resource. It's a fundamental resource for all time and must be preserved for us. It must not be frittered away. One last really important point. Where are the fish? You will often hear the phrase, fish know no boundaries. They know no geopolitical boundaries, but they sure as hell know the biological boundaries. And those biological boundaries keep them, by and large, that's why almost 60% of it is caught in our waters, inside our waters. That's the point. Now, we will have to talk to Norway and would be delighted to do so. But you don't have to give away large quantities of fish. If fish were everywhere and uniformly distributed, we wouldn't be having this conversation because nobody would spend the fuel. They don't come here for scenery. Nobody would spend the fuel to go and fish in UK waters when they could just as easily do it in Belgian, Irish, Dutch, German waters. They come here because that's where the fish are.
Thank you. Seema Malhotra.
Thank you.
Okay, well, thank you very much for the question. I'm involved in marine renewables, which is, I guess it's a subset of the renewable industry. And it's a specific subset because we're involved in leading edge innovation in engineering to develop a new product line of low carbon technologies here. Now, it plays well into the indigenous renewable resources that the UK is blessed with. It is a capitally intensive innovation process, as with most marine engineering technologies. That is something that UK and Scottish Government have been at the forefront of in the last more than a decade or so. But in recent times we have seen the pan-European support for the sector. So we have specific policy initiatives and grant calls under the Horizon 2020 initiative in the EU. That's an €80 billion initiative to support low carbon innovation. So and the sector is benefiting from those large grants now to support the innovation that's going on. There are other initiatives such as the NER 300, which was an initiative to support early commercial arrays to address disparities in cost of energies. That was through the energy trading scheme. I think there was something in excess of 120 million euros already designated towards towards ocean energy schemes. So these are now central pillars in terms of supporting the innovation investments that are taking place in the sector as we move towards commercialisation. So I think for sure this sector would see the threats of Brexit as being distanced from or have access to these innovation initiatives, large-scale initiatives to support supply chain work and investment across the European Union being put at risk.
Do you fear that you will be cut out? Is your concern that you will be cut out of the way the industry is growing in the future when you're talking about supply chains and how the industry will be working over?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think innovation at this stage is in this field is a supply chain initiative, and we are working with supply chain across Europe. But the UK is well placed from its industrial heritage from the oil and gas and the offshore sector to capitalise well on this space. We do feel that there is a risk being cut out going forwards. Sorry, could you repeat the question again?
No, that's fine. Sorry, it was really if you feared being cut out because you talk about programmes and other initiatives.
So sorry,
and whether that is also in terms of access to resources and skills as well as capital. Yes,
absolutely. I mean, I should say that the company that I manage has been recipient of a significant R&D award from Horizon 2020 that is leveraging more inward investment from the private sector into that's something that we have been given confidence will be upheld, although the project runs through till 2019. But I think beyond that, within Horizon 2020, we have no guarantees as to whether or not we will be participating as we are in the current scheme of things. And obviously, European projects are pan-European by their nature, so 50% of the project partners that we're working with are European. About 15% of our workforce is European. So I think we would have concerns across those areas that we may suffer a degree of cut-out.
Could I just pick up on the issue of workforce and access to employees, and perhaps I can start by opening this up to Mr. Armstrong and Mr. Bates as well on this question. In the scenario that you're outlining where the UK may gain control of the exclusive economic zone as well and greater access to the for the capacity of the industry and growing the industry, is your view that we would
be able to scale up and have the resources here, both for the catching of fish and the processing of fish?
First of all, with the catching, the answer is yes. The fishing industry of the UK works at about half throttle because you have to have the capacity to have a big enough boat to cope with the weather, and there have been downturns in the past. So yes is the unequivocal answer to that. The critical path is being the economic engine, is the access to the resource. All else will follow that. It will. There will be economic activity. It's a very first world problem to have a surfeit of raw material that is desired elsewhere. We will sort this out, and with some ease, I think.
If I could ask Mr. Bates, because we've heard in the processing, fish processing sector or industry that there's a lot of migrant labour in that as well, and whether or not you have any concerns about that and sustainability of labour if we leave as we leave the European Union.
Well, certainly. I would agree with how Bertie answered it as well, that our sector is reliant on a wide migrant population, but where our sector is able to adapt to the increases in landings that we've recently experienced at Peterhead. And that has been taken up by processors being able to work longer hours, either normal longer hours or by additional overtime hours. That gives the industry a lot more selling points to attract people to it by becoming a worthwhile industry to enter, both monetary and as a career industry. So there are opportunities there. Businesses are looking to take on staff. And the more that our industry can be seen as long-term, giving more confidence that our industry isn't going to go up and down so much, then that will help to attract people. A lot of companies are investing in their existing workforce to give them qualifications to show that their skills are being recognised, to give them formal qualifications. That again attracts people to see that the industry can benefit them as individuals by investing in their skills, and again that can attract customers to them as they're seen as a company that realises the potential that their staff can give them.
Could I just ask one final question?
Sure.
Or I don't know how long I have actually, Chair. Did I have a few minutes?
You carry, no, you're fine.
Okay.
Yeah, a couple of minutes, yeah.
Could I ask what you believe the UK government needs to do in its opening negotiation priorities to support your sectors?
Can I please? Yes, it's perfectly clear to us, and Alistair teased the question out really. It is for the UK to decide that this is our natural resource, our heritage, and if sustainably harvested will be available forever. To say at the outset that the policy is that we will use, which is normal under international law, this for the benefit of the United Kingdom. The matter of access of other vessels to our waters, they will have access that they presently enjoy, which is unfettered, up until the moment of Brexit, and thereafter that we can negotiate for those countries who have something to offer in exchange for the access. That's normal under international law. That's what other people do. So really what we look for is a clear statement that this is special. This is a natural resource and will not be part of the 30 pieces of silver deal. You will not trade this permanence for ephemeral things, and that access to our waters will be negotiated after Brexit to those who wish to continue access and bring some reason as to why there should be access for them along with them.
Mr. Bates and Mr. Scott, be interested in your...
Thank you. Our sector views on what's happening are basically being complemented or mirrored, so to speak, by the report from Lord Teverson recently, which was published on the BBC News website, where he said that our industry, and that's both the catching sector and the processing sector, was in risk of being marginalised in the wider Brexit negotiations, and that this was a real opportunity to review fisheries management in order to ensure fair access to quota, sustainable stocks and a healthy marine environment. Now, again, in his report, he draws attention to the number of jobs supported in our industry, which is about 12,000. And the importance there is that 3,800, roughly, of those jobs are in the Grampian area alone, and approximately 5,000 in total throughout Scotland, the rest in England. So there's a lot of what we are fighting for, if you like, has been mirrored by what Lord Teverson has reported. And this really is an opportunity to grasp something for the benefit of our country. And I can only reiterate what Bertie said, that it's a positive thing.
And would you, as part of that, would you want to see any relationship with other countries or other fishing fleets, and what would that be for you?
With regard to the fishing fleets, the most important would be the other coastal states, Norway primarily, Iceland and Faroes. We have what everybody else wants. There would be no particular need, one way or another, for a relationship individually with Belgium or with France or the Netherlands. That the interaction with those nations would be sorted out at a coastal states meeting, which would be, instead of EU Norway, would be EU UK Norway, and we could deal globally with the EU.
Okay, Mr. Oh yes, Mr. Scott, I beg your pardon.
Yeah. So I think my suggestions or actions that we want to see is certainly at a high level is a continuation of and commitment to policy to increase and expand the supply of renewable energy, low carbon generation onto the UK network. I think there are directives under which EU stipulates governance and guidance on access to transmission and distribution systems. So I think renewable energy is disadvantaged through its distributed nature, such that it doesn't particularly conform very well to the transmission system that we have in the UK, whereby it was built to take power from centralised power generation. So we now have a renewable sector that needs essentially grid capacity at the peripherals to get the resource to the load centres, and so that's a specific problem in Scotland. There's a very sharp, acute problem on the islands where there is a lot of marine renewables as well. And then I think, specifically for the industry and the business that I work in, would be some level of clarity and commitment that we will still be able to partake in these large-scale innovation schemes such as Horizon 2020.
Just very quickly, Mr. Bates, roughly what proportion of people working in the fish processing sector have come from other EU member states? Just roughly?
I would say 50%.
50%. Now, can I just put this to you? The government has got an aim of reducing net migration to the tens of thousands. It's controlled migration from outside the EU. We've had immigration control for a very long period of time, and someone might argue the only way you're going to achieve that is by significantly squeezing the number of workers who come from the EU. If that were to be the case, who's going to be working in your processing factories if you find that you can't rely on EU workers in the way that you have thus far for half your workforce?
Well, if we can assume that those migrant workers that are already here are allowed to stay here, then the current situation would be that our processors would manage. Extra staff could only come from people that are already in the area and willing to join that company, and that could only come through that company having some attraction, whether it is the only employer in that area, whether it's because the wages are higher now because the company is becoming a bit more successful and can afford to pay more to attract more. If the current migrants have to go back to where they came from, then that's an issue for the whole country, not just our sector.
Thank you very much indeed. Joanna Cherry.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, gentlemen. Mr Armstrong, as I understand it, in the North East, many fishermen voted to leave the European Union in the hope that they could put some of the injustices of the past right and exploit some of the opportunities that you describe. When you read reports in the newspapers that the UK government is in private discussions with the financial services sector, which is obviously huge in terms of revenue compared to the fishing sector, are you at all concerned that fishing interests might be sold out as they were in 1973?
Very much, and that's why we're trying to make the point about a natural resource. It's most unusual to give away a natural resource. That was an entry ticket job, and we must not see that again. You're right about the North East. When, for looking for balance after the referendum, when our journalist friends said, "Can you find me somebody who voted to stay, so that we can get some balance in this?" And I couldn't find one because of the injustices of the CFP. 5 seconds of explanation. It's not because Europeans are stupid or unable to administer. It's the process of co-decision simply doesn't work for something like the CFP. It's distant, remote, it can't keep up, you can't change it quick enough, and then that chucks all the responsibility at the Commission, who have to make it up as they go along. So the whole thing is characterised by groping and fumbling towards compromise. Unacceptable for running a natural resource.
What do you think is the best way of ensuring that Scottish fishing interests are best represented during the negotiations to leave the European Union? Well,
I think the first thing we need to sort out is by the time we get to the declaration of Article 50, that this headline of we will not negotiate away this natural resource which is going to be here for 500 years. Once that's sorted out, we can sort out the downstream details. I'm willing to focus on who's going to occupy the bedrooms before we've bought the flat. Let's get sorted out the big principle of we will assume the responsibilities of a coastal state. It's not whether we assume, that will be assumed. It's whether we trade it away, and we're looking for a commitment that it won't be traded away. And with the matter of access, which is absolutely critical, absolutely crucial, that can be done after the day after Brexit, when people can come along as the demandeur.
You'll have seen the report of the House of Lords Committee that Mr Bates referred to a moment ago, which came out at the weekend. It has concluded that the Brexit vote has resulted in expectations that may be hard to deliver in respect of fisheries. What assessment have you made of that report's conclusions?
We did our best on the embargoed report to catch up with that. The reporting is rather the reporting has made some assumptions that are not in the report. Yeah, a management of expectations for us is important. Otherwise, I'll be face down in the sea of opportunity after my members have finished with me. But we wouldn't necessarily expect absolutely everything at first shot. The fundamentals need to be there. We are a coastal state, and we will take charge of this resource. We will take charge of access, and those who are allowed in will be allowed in if they bring some benefit to the UK. So once those principles are accepted, then of course we can talk about other things. It is inconceivable that no UK boats will fish outside UK waters, and that no foreign vessels will fish inside our waters. That's a fact. But the present situation of common access is a complete distortion, absolutely unacceptable.
Can I turn now, Mr Armstrong, to ask you some questions about trading arrangements as opposed to access arrangements? In July of this year, you gave evidence to the Scottish Parliament's Europe Committee on the implications for Brexit in Scotland, and you were asked about your organisation's preferred trading arrangements with the rest of Europe after Brexit. And I see that you said that you wanted to await some analysis on the trading options. Can I ask you if you've concluded that analysis and if you now have a preference on a specific trading arrangement that would most benefit your sector after Brexit?
One of the observations I made actually to another Common Select Committee on that matter was that, and whereas we may state what is best for us in the fishing industry, the honest truth is we have no GDP heft, and that those decisions will be made by other people rather than us. So we can easily produce a general principle that we would wish to be able to trade freely. If we can still do that with Europe roughly in the way that it looks now, that would be wonderful. But with our Russian experience and with the mouth-watering markets that exist elsewhere, which are presently closed to us, we do not feel that we have a problem. Therefore, concentrating on the minutiae of what may come out is probably wasted effort by us. We're much better concentrating on the big picture of getting the whole natural resource returned to us.
You see, the House of Lords committee, which reported at the weekend, pointed out that the vast majority of UK fish are exported mainly to the European Union. Do you accept that conclusion of the House of Lords committee as correct?
Yes, the majority of fish certainly are exported, and the Europe is a very important thing, but not exclusively. That's the point. There's the pelagic fish, for instance, go to Japan, carefully handled. And the point we would make, we accept that completely, but we demand that we don't always look backwards, wistfully wondering what's going to happen to us when things change, and look forwards to how we're going to change it. And it is a globalized market, and we were, interestingly, the EU yesterday produced some figures to my great surprise, and I tweeted it last night, that the UK is the second, very narrowly behind Spain, exporter of seafood to third countries, not inside the EU, but to third countries. So we already access world markets, and we're looking forward to doing so in the future.
But you do accept the House of Lords conclusion that the majority of UK fish are exported to the European Union. And I'd like to press you on this. You told the convener of the Scottish Parliament Committee back in July that your organisation was going to conduct analysis and that work was ongoing on what preference you would have for a specific trading arrangement. Can you tell us what stage that work is at?
Yes, the present arrangements are governed by something called the CMO. It's part of the Common Fisheries Policy, and it's the common the organisation of the common market in French. And we have reviewed that already, and we have looked at what bits of it would be retained and what bits of it automatically ought to fall. So we are continually looking at that. But I must emphasise that for us to focus on the details of what might be the market is at this stage not the focus. We need to get past Article 50 with a declaration that fishing will stay with us, or there'll be nothing to market.
But this ongoing work, are you able to tell this committee when that ongoing work will be completed and when your organisation will have come to a view and what trading arrangement would be most beneficial for you?
I can certainly send you our analysis of the CMO. And I understand why. You're pressing me on a detail, and that detail is relevant but not central. The central part is to get hold of the economic engine of the resource. Believe me, marketing thereafter will follow in train. There will be slaps and styles, that's an expression you'll understand on the way, but we'll get there.
If I could put it this way, I notice in paragraph 183 of the House of Lords report that you agreed that the EU-Norway model might be the best way for Scotland or the UK going forward in relation to catching arrangements at least. Do you have any view on whether the EU-Norway model would be attractive to Scotland or the UK in terms of trading arrangements?
Yeah, I'm looking at that article. Yeah, it's one of the potential models. The difference between us and Norway is that we are the second largest economy in Europe and the fifth in the world. Norway does not have that overall heft. Therefore, the market arrangements that finally arrive after Brexit may well look different. It would be unwise of me to say that's the answer, the whole answer, and nothing but the answer, because it may well not be.
Of course, Norway is in the single market by virtue of its membership of the European Economic Area. The House of Lords report concluded with a view to trading arrangements for the fishing industry that a successful industry would need continued market access to the European Union single market. Do you agree with that conclusion?
Yes, and I think it's entirely achievable. I'd point out this, that of our resource, as I've already said, the figures are in front of you with the amount of resource that is under our sovereignty post-Brexit that leaves in the hands of European vessels. Let me tell you that Norway pays fish for its access to the single market to the tune of 1% of one stock. Best part of 60% of our entire resource goes. So this whole thing needs adjusting.
And you'll be happy to pass us on your organisation's conclusions on what would be the most preferential trading arrangement when you've reached those?
I would be more than happy, and I think it would be more balanced, if I may, to pass on to you our entire analysis of the whole subject. What ought to happen about, I hate the term repatriation, about normalisation of the resource, how management might work in the newly formed coastal state, how the markets might work. It's very difficult for us to prescribe exactly how the markets will work afterwards. What we cling to is falling back to recent experience and having to reset a market and being successful in doing so.
Mr. Scott, perhaps I could just ask you a couple of questions. You spoke earlier in response to one of my colleagues about the importance of European funding to Scottish renewable projects, and you mentioned Horizon 2020. I believe schemes like Fast Track to Innovation and the European Investment Bank have also been important for your sector. Is that correct?
Yes, that is correct. I mean, I guess the majority of funding at this stage has come through Horizon 2020 and NER 300. But certainly there's ongoing work with the industry, with the likes of EIB, to look at some financial mechanisms to handle risk and so forth in early commercial projects.
What would be the effect for your sector of no longer having access to these funding resources?
Well, if they weren't coming from somewhere else, I think we'd have a serious problem. I mean, technology never comes out of the box and is cost competitive. It's taken 30 years and 300 gigawatts of onshore wind to get wind down to the cost that we see it now. And in that process, it's reduced its cost by over 90%. So I mean, we do genuinely believe that we've got a new technology opportunity here that has long-term sustainable socio-economic benefits for the UK, because it will be a global market. But if we cannot raise inward investment into R&D to help bridge that commercialisation gap at this stage, the sector may well just fail.
Just briefly, Mr. Chair, one further question. To what extent does, Mr. Scott, for you, to what extent does the Scottish renewables sector and the growth of the Scottish renewables sector rely on the export of manufactured goods and the export of knowledge and expertise? And do you foresee any constraints on the growth of the sector if there was limited access or no access at all to the single market?
In terms of where it is at the moment, commercial, when we talk commercial renewables, I mean, that is predominantly onshore and offshore wind and solar PV and so forth. I think if you look at the supply chain breakdown there, it's probably something in the order, certainly offshore wind is somewhere in the order of 80% import in terms of technology on a capex spend, which is one of the attractions for generating new technology innovations, where marine renewables, we could have 80% of that capex being retained within the UK economy. Now, through establishing commitment of the supply chain to entrench it here in the UK, then obviously we have the opportunity to then export that. Now, Europe has got wide-scale policy mechanisms to support renewables, so certainly renewable, we would see the rest of Europe as a prime market, but as I said, it is a global market as well, with the likes of Far East, Philippines, and Canada and so forth being potential markets going forward. But it's important, if we don't, the model's often, or the example is often pointed to about the industrial benefit that the likes of Denmark and Germany have achieved through supporting onshore wind, where there's over 100,000 people involved in manufacturing and assembly of wind turbines, and that is a success story that we could replicate here. But I think the important message as well is that came through supply chain investment into Denmark and Germany, because they led in terms of policy and creating markets. So I think that's something we need to ensure is retained.
Thank you. Thank you. And finally, Michael Gove.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Earlier this month, Fergus Ewing, the Minister for the Rural Economy in the Scottish Government, said that the common fisheries policy has not been a success for Scottish fisheries, and he suggested that an arrangement in the future would involve European countries negotiating for access to the UK EEZ in the same way as Norway, the Faroes and Iceland allow. Question for both Mr. Bates and Mr. Armstrong. Do you think Mr. Ewing was right?
Thank you very much. Yes, the observation that we will have to negotiate with those named countries, of course, is correct, for sure. It's just the basis of the negotiation that we're very keen. No one is confused about how that will have revolutionized itself, absolutely revolutionized itself. You don't get into Norwegian waters, you do not get into Norwegian waters unless you're bringing something with you, and there's some reason for you to be there. We think the negotiations will continue. There still will be access, but the whole circumstance of that will change radically if this is properly handled, what we would regard as properly handled.
Yes, I would agree with Bertie. I think one of the other things we have to recognise is that it is the UK government that are involved in negotiations, but when it comes to fishing, we would like to see our fisheries minister heavily involved with the UK minister, because of the predominant effect is in Scotland. So that's probably the only thing I would add to the comments.
That's very helpful, thank you. Now, my understanding is that in terms of the number of hundreds of thousands of tonnes of fish landed in UK ports, the figure is between 600 and 700,000 most recently. Am I right in thinking that in the last comparable year that the figure in the tiny Faroe Islands was just under that, and that the figure in Norway was more than 3 times that?
That is absolutely correct, and it reflects the evolution of the way fisheries management happened. In the beginning, everybody fished everywhere. In the late 60s, early 70s, everybody thought the sea was a bottomless pit of resource, and we had at it with some vigour to our later concern because we were overfishing. Everyone was overfishing. But there was a point when there were no quotas. This was when we joined the EC, as it was. There were no quotas or TACs, and everybody fished everywhere, other than inside 12-mile limits. That was it. So when the government of the day made fishing expendable, and that famous memo surfaced, that was exactly what they did. I don't think they realized the scale of generosity of what they had just done, because common access fell away under international law for everywhere else. The Cod Wars saw to that, and we were summarily turned out in the fullness of time after several goes. I was there, one of them. They were turned out. We were turned out of Icelandic waters, never to return. So just on the passing matter of historical access, if historical access was worth the paper it was written on, we'd still be fishing in Iceland, and we are not. The great distortion that occurred inside our waters, because all the fish are here, to very greatly generalize and specify, evolved with everybody having that common resource. And everybody else, like Norway, took stewardship of their own resource. And that's why the figures you quoted have been the end point of evolution, which we now need to see righted.
Given how effectively the Faroese and the Norwegians have managed sustainability, and given that the Norwegians have 3 times as many fish landed as we do in the UK, presumably there's the potential for at least a doubling in the number of fish landed at UK harbours by UK boats if we negotiate a smart deal.
If you look at the figures, that's entirely possible. That's entirely possible. But better still, we would look forward to more, as Fergus Ewing described the CFP, to a more rational, sensible and regionalised management system to allow that to greatly increase. There is potential there for carefully handled fish stocks, the stocks themselves, to produce much more opportunity, particularly and that will overwhelm the more sensible splitting of resource. I've stated that very badly indeed. You see what I'm getting at?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
A question for Mr. Bates. My understanding is that overall there are about 12,000 people employed in the UK in fish processing, 5,000 in Scotland, 3,800 in what used to be called the Grampian region, Aberdeen, Aberdeenshire, thereabouts. According to labour market statistics, there are 12,200 economically inactive people in Aberdeenshire who've expressed a desire to have a job, and 6,700 within Aberdeen City. So do you believe that there's the potential, if fishing is on a more sustainable footing, of hiring folk not just from the northeast of Scotland, but more widespread across Scotland in order to work in what would be a growth industry?
Yes, I do. The challenge we have is to change the perception of our industry. It is naturally a cold environment to work in. It is one of those environments where heating only occurs in offices and changing rooms because of the very nature of the product. So we have a challenge in educating people what they're coming into, and part of that challenge as an association, we've been engaging with various unemployment bodies, educational bodies, to give them an idea of the industry by taking them to the fish market, taking them around various processors, so that they can see at first hand how a factory operates and what the conditions are like, and what the various job opportunities exist within different types of processors. So yes, I agree with you that there is a huge opportunity there, but we do have a challenge in making that an attractive opportunity.
I quite understand. And my understanding is that something like 95% of Faroese exports are fisheries. Have the Faroe Islands experienced in the last couple of years any problems with market access to the European Union? Because because my understanding is that something like 639,000 Danish kroner worth of fish were bought by Germany from the Faroe Islands, and similar numbers obviously bought by Denmark, the Netherlands, France and other EU countries. So the Faroes are outside the European Union, not just outside the single market, but they haven't had any problems with market access for their fine fish products, have they?
Perversely enough, when the Russian sanctions hit, Faroe, not being in the EU, was cheerfully happy to fill the void and grab that market, and has now probably captured it for all time because the market's being supplied. Yeah.
And as well as that, the capacity to exploit new markets by being outside the European Union, there doesn't seem to have been any problem in continuing to provide high-quality seafood to EU.
No, I think not. Michael put his finger on it, if I may say it. The amount of fish that happens made from our EEZ that ends up beautifully handled and displayed and sold in Spain, France, Italy. If we're catching that fish, we might repeat the trick that the Icelanders played upon us, which was to dispose of our long distance fleets, but catch the same fish in the same waters and return them happily to Humberside for processing, and of course over the years do more of the processing themselves. So the fish would still exist, the fish would still be sustainably caught, the people of Europe would still want it. The trick will be to get access for us to do it, and you have a bit of a whip hand if you've got all the fish.
Thank you very much, thank you.
Just a question to you, Mr. Armstrong. Britain leaves, and say the outcome that you've hoped for today comes to pass. Where is that going to leave the common fisheries policy of the 27 member states? Is that, I know that's not your principal concern, but I'm just interested in your view. In what form do you think it will survive? Will it survive?
Well, the most significant thing is the competence. If you look at the little diagram in that little shot that I gave, most of the common fisheries policy area will disappear. There will be, Belgium has an EEZ the size of 2 football pitches, and the fish aren't there. That's the point. So there will be radical changes. Where the CFP will go, it's hard to imagine, because the very basis of the CFP, some of which we would retain, but the very basis of the CFP is common access to European waters. That's ours. And when that goes, really, there'll be something of a hollowed out set of regulations there. Some of it will be retained. Everything that applies to sustainability, the quest for maximum sustainable yield, all that can be retained with pleasure. It's just that the common access bit and the 1,000 pieces of legislation, including how to mend a net, just have to go.
Of the European Investment Bank, which I imagine has made significant investments in renewables in the UK. Currently the European Investment Bank is obviously open only to members of the European Union. Would you consider that a continued membership of the European Investment Bank will be in the UK's interests, or that its replacement by, for instance, a UK investment bank would be adequate?
Well, I think either that fills the void of being able to take a strategic view on risk, where the private sector maybe is prohibited to. So, I mean, the UK did, of course, have Green Investment Bank, but that's been rather scaled back and sold off now. So, I mean, I think it's either an access to the EIB or something of similar function, as I said, that's able to take that strategic view and potentially take some risk where private sector isn't able to in early stage development.
Okay, well, thank you very much indeed, Mr. Scott, Mr. Bates, Mr. Armstrong, for coming along here today, giving up your valuable time and giving us such valuable evidence. That concludes the session. Order, order.